My Lords, I always think that legislation, and this is not the only example, which arises in reaction to a single event, is almost certain to be foolish, pointless, dangerous, and lead us astray. And that's particularly so when reflection has shown that the initial understanding of that event, in this case I'm talking about the mini budget, was flawed, and that in fact it wasn't the mini budget and its measures that caused, and its fiscal measures that caused the market volatility, but it's now accepted even by the Bank of England, I believe, in a recent paper, that about 2/3 of the volatility was caused by the Bank of England's own misregulation of some dodgy LDS schemes in pension funds, which I don't claim to understand. Possibly the noble Lord Davis of Brixton, who spoke before me, would understand them, given his background. But that they were happening somewhere in the equivalent of the dark net of the pensions industry, and they were what caused most of the problem. Perhaps we'd be better off having a bill which penalised the Bank of England for misregulating pension funds and other financial institutions within its purview, and that might actually keep it on its toes. My second point was one that has already been made to some extent by my noble friend Lord Frost and my noble friend Baroness Lawler, and that is that this bill is a further step in the de-democratisation of our decision-making, our governmental decision-making. It is the transfer, effectively, of power from elected ministers, who are accountable to the electorate, to unaccountable institutions on the basis of the claim that they are somehow independent. They simply have a view. They simply have a view as to how certain changes in taxation and expenditure are going to affect the economy. It's perfectly possible for somebody else to have a different view. In fact, it's perfectly possible for a Chancellor of the Exchequer to have a different view. The noble Viscount Lord Chandos tried to persuade us that this wasn't in fact so, but of course the whole point of the bill is precisely to trammel and put handcuffs on the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And of course the first people who will be penalised by this and come to regret this legislation will no doubt be the current Chancellor of the Exchequer and her successors, if she has any, over the next few years. But that is the whole purpose of the bill beyond its performative measure. My third and final point was simply to say that I wanted to follow, the noble Baroness Lady Wheatcroft had said something to the effect that we were looking at our public accounts the wrong way. We have this enormous, I agree with her to some extent, I want to make a different point though. We have this enormous focus on the fiscal rules, which are essentially about the level of debt that the government can carry. But this is a secondary matter. The really crucial matter is what level of national income should the government be disposing of. Now, that is, to some extent, a political question, because inevitably the Labour Party will take the view that the government should dispose of a larger sum, and the Conservatives would probably take the view, I hope, that it should dispose of a smaller sum, with the Liberal Democrats not quite clear where they would necessarily stand on that crucial question. But that is the essential point that should drive all of our politics. But it isn't simply a political matter, because it can also be considered in terms of the effectiveness of that spending and whether that spending, as it increases, achieves a proportional improvement in the outcome of public services, or whether it runs into what might be described as diminishing returns. I would say the evidence is clear that increased public expenditure does start at a certain point to run into the problem of diminished returns when measuring the outputs that the government actually achieves. Spending more money on the health service it might produce more hospitals, but does it produce better health outcomes Are people, are deaths from certain illnesses improving, and so forth? When you measure those things, it is, I think, fairly clear from the evidence that simply spending more money does not produce proportionate outcomes. So I would think the government really needs to focus on questions of that character, because the question then, how do you fund that expenditure, be it debt or taxation, is an important one, but essentially secondary.